Russian occupation forces continue to saturate the temporarily occupied Crimean peninsula with troops and equipment, fearing to lose it. This was reported in the commentary to Kremlin by the representative of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Andrei Chernyak. He noted that in response to the threat of losing the peninsula, Russian troops will increase the number of units and personnel. According to Chernyak, Russia's main goal is to guarantee the security of Crimea and its defense. Chernyak emphasized that the main task of Russian troops is to maintain control over Crimea and prevent its capture in the future. To do this, they plan to strengthen the peninsula with troops and equipment as much as possible. Ukrainian political and economic expert Taras Zagorodniy emphasized that Ukraine will never recognize Crimea as part of Russia. Nobody will sign up for this. Who would want to sign their own sentence for treason? Purely theoretically, the US could recognize Crimea as Russia. This will give nothing but shame, he emphasized. The expert says that a drop in oil prices is expected soon, which is the main problem of the aggressor country Russia. At the same time, the US is hitting the entire arc of Russia's allies. They are hitting Iran. Sanctions were recently introduced on oil supplies to China. Pressure is beginning on China, and China is now devaluing the yuan, and I am convinced that this is not the last devaluation of the yuan. And for Russia, this means that its reserves are devaluing. If Russia devalues the ruble now, it will lose another 20% of its income from oil trade, he noted. According to him, strikes are still being carried out, no matter how hard the United States tries to save Russia. We can learn from the Europeans. They say that without the US, of course, nothing will happen. Nothing will work out. Meanwhile, Portugal is buying Swedish Gripen instead of American F-35s. Of course, without the US, nothing will happen. Only first, Europe will stop buying American weapons, will push American business out of Europe, because what is it needed for without security, etc.? So the states are already losing money for no reason, Zagorodniy added.
The White House press said Monday President Donald Trump is increasingly frustrated with the leaders of both Russia and Ukraine and wants to see a permanent ceasefire first to stop the killing. According to Associated Press, the remarks from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt come as Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday declared a unilateral 72-hour ceasefire next week in Ukraine to mark Victory Day in World War II. Kiev, meanwhile, insisted on a longer and immediate truce, dismissing Putin's truce as window dressing. He is increasingly frustrated with leaders of both countries, Leavitt said at a White House briefing Monday morning. He wants to see a permanent ceasefire, she added. And while he remains optimistic, he can strike a deal, he's also being realistic as well, and both leaders need to come to the table to negotiate their way out of this, Leavitt said, adding that Trump wants to be a peacemaker president. Putin previously announced a unilateral 30-hour Easter ceasefire, and Ukraine voiced readiness to reciprocate any genuine truce at the time, but it said Russian attacks continued. Moscow, in turn, accused Ukraine of failing to halt its attacks. Russia and Ukraine had also earlier pledged to observe a 30-day halt on strikes on energy infrastructure that was brokered by the Trump administration, but they repeatedly accused each other of massive violations until the measure expired. Trump said over the weekend he harbors doubts about Putin's sincerity in pursuing a deal, as Russian forces have continued to strike civilian areas of Ukraine with cruise and ballistic missiles while the talks have proceeded.
Hey everybody, how are you?
Caroline, can you tell us more about the meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky over the weekend? Did that meeting change anything? Did Trump leave that meeting thinking any differently about negotiations and next steps on this?
Look, the president talked about this after the meeting himself yesterday when he took questions from reporters on Air Force One. He thinks that he is increasingly frustrated with leaders of both countries. He wants to see a permanent ceasefire. I understand Vladimir Putin this morning offered a temporary ceasefire. The president has made it clear he wants to see a permanent ceasefire first to stop the killing, stop the bloodshed. And while he remains optimistic he can strike a deal, he's also being realistic as well. well. And both leaders need to come to the table to negotiate their way out of this. And I do think that the president meeting with President Zelensky shows that he is exuding a lot of effort and time into this because he wants to be a peacemaker president, which he was in his first term. He intends to do that again. And this is an incredibly difficult situation and conflict that President Trump inherited from President Biden, who allowed this war to start in the first place, but he's focused on solving this problem. Does anyone have border questions? Sure.
Germany will step up to the new security demands in Europe, President Frank-Walter Steinmeier vowed on Monday, as his country marked 70 years of NATO membership against the background of the Trump administration signaling that U.S. priorities lie elsewhere. Today, with Putin's war against Ukraine raging on in full force and with the United States putting fierce pressure on its European allies, Germany, I think, is in a crucial position, Steinmeier said. Germany is being called on, and we heard the call. We got the message and indeed, Mark, you can count on us, he said, standing alongside NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte at the 32-nation military alliance's Brussels headquarters. According to Associated Press, at the same place in February, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told Ukraine's Western backers, most of them NATO members, that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. Apart from the security challenges the U.S. believes are posed by China, Hegseth said that America would also be focusing on the security of our own borders. His remarks, the first by a member of the new Trump administration at NATO, unsettled Germany and other allies, and many want to know how many U.S. troops might be pulled out of Europe and when so they can fill any security vacuum. No U.S. withdrawal plans have officially been announced. Hegseth also added a warning that Ukraine will not get all its territory back from Russia and will not be allowed to join their security organization, which would provide Kiev with the ultimate security guarantee to ensure that Putin never attacks again. NATO leaders have always insisted that membership should be discussed solely among allies and candidates and that Moscow can have no say, but recently it's become a bargaining chip in talks between the United States, Russia and Ukraine. NATO was formed in 1949 as a bulwark against aggression in Europe by the Soviet Union. Former West Germany sought protection as its 15th member on May 6, 1955, as concern grew about the Soviet army massed east of the Iron Curtain. 70 years on, the threat from Moscow persists and Germany's incoming coalition has ambitious plans to loosen strict debt rules for higher defense spending to help strengthen the country's long-neglected military.
Today, with Putin's war against Ukraine raging on in full force and with the United States putting fierce pressure on its European allies, Germany, I think, is in a crucial position. That's why I speak to you, your allies, not just with gratitude, but with urgency. Germany is being called on, and we heard the call, we got the message, and indeed, Mark, you can count on us. And whole Europe in ruins. We will continue to strengthen our armed forces, the Bundeswehr, and we will step up investments in our defense industry. We will work hard to meet our commitments to NATO's regional plans. We will continue to be Ukraine's strongest supporter in Europe to uphold its freedom and its sovereignty and its European future. And we will strive to make Germany, both its military and its infrastructure, the backbone of conventional defense in Europe.